Observer says the dots connect. Many of these pastors know about each other's misdeeds, yet they cover them up because they know that they also have misdeeds that they don't want exposed. It's a society. There is a lot to say about that. I would argue. I was telling my wife when we were driving over here. I might have said more about scandals in the church than any grace pastor who has ever existed. I have a gigantic document of message points about scandals in the church. We have, going all the way back to 2020, chronicled just about every major scandal under the sun, including Ravi Zacharias. There was the Liberty University guy, Jerry Falwell Jr. There were a number of other scandals. The Hillsong churches, a lot of scandals over the years. And there are, Paul gives an outline as to how to handle scandals in 1 Timothy 5, the end of that chapter. And there is a responsibility for the elders of a church to investigate and make determinations about a claim that's being made. And one common thread throughout all of these scandals is that you have a board who knows that this ministry or that church or that organization is really centered around this person who is behaving abominably, and they choose to overlook it. And by choosing to overlook this horrible, scandalous thing that this person is doing, they are creating more victims by turning the other way, looking the other way. That's one common thread with all these scandals, and we've got to a point now in Christendom where people are fed up with churches and organizations that are hiding scandals. Now, a scandal being hidden, overlooked by the board, or steamrolled that's more of a megachurch thing. Small church like this, a tiny little grace church, it's hard to keep a secret in the grace movement. Things are going to happen. Now, I think that 1 Timothy 5, every scandal, every situation requires individual consideration. And I think depending upon what the issue is and who the pastor is, the board has to make an individual consideration about if they want to do any discipline or if they want to remove that pastor from his position. And then they also have to take individual consideration as to whether maybe years down the road they want to allow that pastor back behind the pulpit. Those are all decisions that need to be made at the local level in the church. But
it's a local church issue.
Exactly. And I think grace movement as a whole has been, our issues are more doctrinal than they were making mistakes in your walk kind of thing. But there have been pastors that have not walked well. And we have our fair share of scandals also. But in the grace movement, you don't really see too much in the way of covering up. Word gets out, everybody knows, and you're done. I don't know what else there is to say about that.
Well, there's a scriptural principle. If it's something everybody knows about, then it needs to be addressed publicly.
Yeah, that's true. Right.
But if it's an internal matter, it can have to be quiet. And it does make a difference too if it's the pastor or layman. So,
really, there was in 1 Timothy 5:22, he said, "Lay hands suddenly on no man." Well, first of all, he says in verse 21, "I charge thee before God and the Lord Jesus Christ and the elect angels," talking about how to deal with a scandal with an elder who has received an accusation, and he says, "Observe these things without preferring one before another, doing nothing by partiality." When you have an issue of behavior and somebody misbehaving terribly, you can't be partial in that investigation and the determination about how to handle it. And then he says, "Lay hands suddenly on no man." Well, if you don't be quick to escalate somebody into a role of like elder or deacon. And then if you had an elder or a deacon that was removed from that position, don't be quick to restore them. He says, neither be partaker of other men's sins. And I suspect in that context, you might have here this idea that, if you allow, if this sin
right.
issue goes uncorrected, unaddressed, and you allow it to continue, knowing full well that this is going on, you're partaking in that sin because you're whitewashing it, or you are not addressing it, not dealing with it. And a little leaven leaveneth the whole lump. Egregious sin has to be dealt with in the local assembly. And keep thyself pure. If there is an egregious sin that's taking place with maybe one of the elders, or I don't know, something going on, has to be addressed. Has to be addressed. Has to be dealt with fairly. No partiality.
No
Lots of love for the
partiality.
saints. And discipline should be determined, but in the context of making sure that they know that they are still greatly loved. They're not judging the person, they're judging the behavior in those circumstances. The person was already judged at Calvary that moment they got saved. And some men's sins are open beforehand, going before to judgment. Some men they follow after, right? And like in this meaning that, some people have done things that everybody knows about. And then there are some people who have done things that were secret, and then that has been exposed, and and now their sins follow after them. They are known for that mistake that they made in the past.
Right.
So I would strongly recommend a study of 1 Timothy 5. And I think a lot of grace churches have a tendency to have weak boards who might be a little too leery to address an issue with a pastor who might not be walking in the way that he should be walking. But these are instructions of God designed for the elders or for the pastor in order to deal with some sort of accusation against a church leader of some kind. That does not get discussed very often in grace. I don't think I've ever heard a sermon about it. I probably read about it like in Stam's commentaries on the pastoral epistles, but it doesn't get a lot in the way of discussion. And it was just inevitable that we would have to discuss this because of the nature of our podcast. But anything you want to add to that, Pastor?
No, it's it's a difficult situation. And I guess it's more of a problem of addressing it correctly. The ministries that are built around a man,
Right.
and then that man falls in sin
Right.
in some way, and they've just built a magnificently big sanctuary.
Right.
I would
Right.
call it I wouldn't call it a sanctuary, but big building, big church, big mortgages, big this, big that.
That's right.
And unfortunately, some of the options then become limited because what are they going to do?
Right. There is I must have 20 articles. 20 articles, 30 maybe of a wide variety of scandals going on now. It's just the scandals are just voluminous on a weekly basis. We had talked about not too long ago. There was a lot of them have been in Dallas and in Texas, and we talked about Robert Morris a number of weeks back, and that church is still continuing to reel from the issue with Robert Morris. Robert Morris did something in his 20s that was horrific. It was consensual, but he had an affair with an underage girl, and this was known by the elders. The father was just like, he gets out of the ministry or I'm calling the cops kind of thing. And years later, he still went back into the ministry. He took over this massive mega church. It's like it was one of the biggest churches, the biggest church in the country. And this woman who was a victim, underage victim, and it's just abominable. how young she was, she continued to want compensation from him because it just made her so angry that Robert Morris was over a mega church making millions of dollars every year. And so she kept probing, she kept wanting to get more compensation from him until finally she said, "Look, you're going to pay me this or I'm going to expose what you did." And they said, "No, we're not paying you." And so he got
He did it.
exposed. And, you make a mistake like that in your life where you have actually done something that horrible. You should never, you are permanently, in my opinion, you're permanently disqualified from ministry. He should have never gone into ministry, never been allowed into ministry, and should have never been pastor of that church. They have also noted over time that he, in his books and stuff, talked about his own problems in the past and just completely whitewashed or lied about mistakes he's made. He did admit that he had an affair, but there was a lot of details he didn't tell the congregation. And people, once you know that, even years ago, you made that kind of a mistake, they don't want their kids or their family anywhere near you. That's just that's just the way people are. I don't blame them.
Well, my personal feeling perhaps would be, you go back into time when it was revealed, he should have, the only ministry that he should be a part of. I wouldn't say forever like you did, but that's a long time. But his ministry should have been a prison ministry.
Yep,
He
totally
should have
agree.
been inside and had a prison ministry, not where he goes in and comes out.
Exactly.
Where he stays in.
And the thing is, I think, and that leads to another point, when the board knew what Robert Morris did way back when, and they had a responsibility. I don't care whether it was a law or not. They had a responsibility to inform the police about this, what he did.
That's what I believe.
And I think that even today, you have a pastor misbehaving. If he does something illegal, the board has a responsibility to let the cops know. It's when they don't call the cops or when they allow somebody to continue in ministry, they are 9 times out of 10 creating more victims.
Yes.
They know he has this tendency, and they are creating an environment in which he is going to prey upon somebody else, possibly, and there will be more victims. And this was one of the things that was a big issue with the Ravi Zacharias scandal, because the board, I mean, there was a lady on the board who knew about what he was doing to women and tried to get this addressed. They fired her. And then years later, when this became exposed and public, now his wife is still claiming it's all lies. But when this issue became public, people were suing the board members because they knew about it and did nothing. And by doing that, they more victims were created. Right. And the board members, there were a number of articles of them just apologizing up and down for their failure to address this issue with Zacharias, and how they failed the public by not reeling in this predator. That's a major consideration.
It would affect me to think that I was, because of some decision I made, that someone else would be victimized.
Right.
And that would be a horrible thing for me to live with. But that's what we say: get right back to the first offense.
Yep.
Call the cops,
and
let him deal with it in the courts, whatever that ends up being.
Yep. Yeah, don't get me started on that soapbox. I have studied, and it was Jerry Falwell Jr. that made me go, oh, what does Paul say in 1 Timothy 5 again? How do you handle scandals?